It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop on this Monday morning, and I recognize haven't been able to do many programs last week as I'm still remote, taking care of a personal issue, but definitely want to keep you updated on a lot of things that happened and things that we expect to happen here in the future. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Now, while I've not been doing the morning show the past few days, definitely get over to thecentersquare.com where you can get the newsletter and get the headlines, including a headline: former Pritzker administration official that led the charge in the COVID-19 pandemic, agreeing to pay a $150,000 fine for an ethics violation. Dr. Ngozi Ezike, head of the IDPH during the COVID pandemic. She quit in 2022, took a job with a hospital, but that hospital got $4.2 million in contracts from the state. So the Illinois Ethics Act says can't do that. So she has to pay $150,000. You can read up on that. You can also read up on the Illinois Attorney General joining 12 other attorneys general from across the country to question Walmart about their internal policies and why they're stepping back from diversity, equity, and inclusion. Another headline you'll be able to find there. Walmart says they're just open to being welcoming to everybody, but they seem to not be using the language that DEI prescribes. So you've got some interesting dynamics there you can read about. You can also stay up to date on the latest in the Madigan case, with former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan taking the witness stand. We're going to have to connect with Jim Talamonte, the reporter in Chicago for the Center Square that's been tracking this, and just the incredible things that he's had to hear in that courtroom, with today prosecutors getting ready to do that cross-examination. So just some of the things going on. Get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. Coming up, we got a couple of issues we're going to talk about. One, a measure that passed during lame duck session about gun confiscation, and then two, the end of the 103rd General Assembly and the beginning of the 104th General Assembly. That's all coming up here with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.
It's not okay that we are concerned, that some people are concerned more so with the rights to bear arms, the rights to have access to guns. These are abusers.
Karina's bill meets the last two components, but it fails to meet the first component. And the first component is that the accused has the right to defend themselves in a hearing. That's the issue here, is whether the accused has the right to defend themselves. We have a presumption of innocence in this country. I don't like having to be up here testifying like this on this one, because I agree we should not be arming abusers, but you have a right to be found that first.
That was State Senator Selena Villanueva and Josh Witkowski with the Illinois Federation for Outdoor Resources, talking about a measure that enhances the state's red flag laws, that people are raising concerns does not include due process. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop, and a lot to tackle with this one. I'm looking at my cut list here, and well, it's pretty lengthy, so let's get right on into it. So I believe it's House Bill 4144, a measure that would essentially bring about Karina's Law. It's a measure named after an individual who was killed by their domestic partner, who was under an order of protection. So essentially what this measure would do is it would say that if there's an order of protection, a judge orders that the firearms be relinquished, then police have to confiscate those. So let's get into it. The Illinois Senate last week, before they brought it up in the Senate chambers, they held a hearing to discuss the bill, and then you had the Illinois State Rifle Association's Ed Sullivan and also Josh Witkowski with the Illinois Federation of Outdoor Resources talk about some of their problems with the measure as it was written.
So if we're going to take away a constitutional right, and everybody says we want to follow Rahimi, this bill does not follow Rahimi. And it does not follow Rahimi in relationship to ex parte hearings where the respondent does not, in essence, get a hearing, which is required under the Rahimi Supreme Court case. And so
We took a look at 18 USC 922 G8 in its entirety, of which there are three components. Karina's bill meets the last two components, but it fails to meet the first component. And the first component is that the accused has the right to defend themselves in a hearing. And that's the issue here, is whether the accused has the right to defend themselves. We have a presumption of innocence in this country. I don't like having to be up here testifying like this on this one, because I agree, we should not be arming abusers. But you have a right to be found that first.
After committee, it went to the Illinois Senate floor, where State Senator Chapin rose. He said, constitutional issues aside, this measure, it's just not workable.
There is a real disconnect, as well-intentioned as this is, between what people believe is doable and what is actually doable. And setting aside all the constitutional concerns for a minute, and I have many, setting aside all those concerns for a minute, what is in reality going to happen is the part-time chief who's on vacation that week is going to call the sheriff's deputy who's up in Chrisman rather than in Brockton, and then they're going to call the state police who are in Pontiac, and nobody's going to get to this into the 48 or 72 hours or whatever it is. And when someone does get hurt, everybody gets sued. Oh, wait a minute. Not only they get sued, maybe they lose their entire license to be a police officer in the first place because they didn't get it done. This isn't like, I mean, I say this not to just stand up and say it, it's reality. I mean, downstate Illinois cannot comply with half the stuff this place passes in the first place.
Republican State Senator Steve McClure, he stood up and said there needs to be other efforts to go after those who violate orders of protection, including penalty enhancements.
But we do have to point out that over the past year, domestic violence deaths have doubled in our state. And the policies that have been in place that have allowed this to happen were not policies that our side of the aisle championed. Over the course of this session, we have filed quite a few bills that deal with domestic violence cases, and in my view would save lives. And we've yet to get a single hearing on any of those pieces of legislation. This bill deals with orders of protection. I filed a bill that would make it a felony to violate an order of protection. Do all of you know that right now in the state of Illinois, if you violate an order of protection, it's a misdemeanor? Do you know what else is a misdemeanor? If you walk into a store and you take a candy bar and you leave, that's a misdemeanor. Do you know how tough it is for these domestic violence victims to go before their abusers in court? And what it puts them through, the fear they have, the torture that is, only to know that their abuser is not going to go to jail, not be taken away?
Wrapping up the debate in the Senate, Selena Villanueva, the sponsor of the bill, got emotional.
It's not okay that we are concerned, that some people are concerned more so with the rights to bear arms, the rights to have access to guns. These are abusers. We are talking about people that are abusing the people that they claim to love, that are threatening them with harm, that are shooting them and killing them. That is what we are talking about. These are guns in the hands of abusers. 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 These are people that are inflicting harm and damage. They are using fear and isolation in order to have power and control over the people that they claim to love. We are trying to get guns out of the hands of abusers. And it's time. It's time to look at these issues and stop thinking that things are black and white when they are not. If we are aware that we need to treat different situations in different manners, we need to do away with thinking that it's okay to say, this is gray area and we really shouldn't touch it. That's our job. Our job is to fight and protect the people of the state.
Now, if you look at the board there, you can see several Republicans that joined Democrats in supporting this in the Illinois Senate. They didn't have to support it. Democrats have supermajorities to be able to get these bills through both chambers, but Republicans like Senate Minority Leader John Curran, Senator Sue Rezin, Senator Craig Wilcox, Senator Don DeWitt voting with Democrats on this measure to advance it out of the Senate. Now in the House, much more thorough debate, and included State Representative Maura Hirschauer, who pushed this bill in the House, explaining what the bill ultimately does.
In Illinois, our FOID laws have long recognized that a person with a domestic violence order of protection should not be able to possess firearms. This bill builds out a robust framework under our current domestic violence laws that clearly outlines the process of collecting firearms from abusers when survivors are specifically at risk of those firearms and clarifies the existing protections under these laws. House Bill 4144, Senate Amendment 2, accomplishes this pretty simply. Number one, we clarify that these firearm remedies are available when survivors are most at risk at the emergency stage of the order of protection. Number two, we create clear legal standards for the surrender or removal of firearms, as well as clear timelines. Number three, we take steps to ensure abusers cannot get access to their firearms once these remedies are granted by creating a process centered to survivor safety for when firearms can be stored by a third party rather than law enforcement. And finally, this bill clarifies and adds additional improvements so that firearms can be returned to their owners at the end of the order of protection.
But then you have a Republican House leader, Patrick Windhorst. He's always seems to be the first to be asking substantive questions about a lot of these bills, and he grilled Hirschauer on a variety of aspects of the measure.
We are centering them in this conversation. In this bill, with guidance from our sheriffs and our law enforcement, we built out some time frames to allow law enforcement to get the information they need before they access the search warrant. So there's a 48-hour provision on the civil side that will allow law enforcement to do their own investigation, make sure they have everything they need to be safe before they go serve the search warrant.
Would the law enforcement officers, after the search warrant is entered, have any discretion to serve it or not to serve the search warrant?
They have the ability to modify the warrant as needed, to change information that they see fit to be changed. They have the ability to petition for an additional 96 hours wherein they can take more time to serve the warrant. Thank you for your patience. I want to get this right. It's so important.
You're fine.
So we have built in those modifications that are accessible to law enforcement, but once a judge has made the order, there is no discretion before carrying it out.
Is there any ability under the law in the civil context, if law enforcement obtains information that makes the information provided by the petitioner not credible, where they could ask that the search warrant be vacated by the judge?
They can modify, they can make corrections, and they can negate.
Negate. So they could say, Judge, we believe this order should be vacated. Is that a yes? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Now, current law allows for an individual that's subject to an order of protection to relinquish those firearms to a third party that has a FOID card. It doesn't have to be police, but it could be police, or it could be a cousin across the town. But that's how the current law is. If you are subject of an order of protection, you can give those firearms to a third party. It doesn't have to be police coming in and confiscating them. So that's a question that Windhorst had about how does that work now?
Can an individual who's a respondent who is ordered to surrender firearms transfer them to a third party?
So taking law enforcement's advisement under consideration, we understand the importance of third-party transfer, and we have worked into the bill a procedure for respondents. Most importantly, in this critical, timely nature of an emergency, we need law enforcement to take possession of those firearms. They are the most trusted and safest place for the firearms to be. Once law enforcement has taken possession, a respondent may petition the court with a valid FOID card holder to come in and make that third-party transfer. It's survivor-centered. It makes sure we have a clear record of who has the guns and that they know, the great responsibility that they're carrying on to. It also allows, I know guns can be very expensive. They can be family heirlooms, the whole host of things, how they're important to a person, and this allows those guns to be transferred.
Windhorst then brought up a couple of different Supreme Court cases on guns and the Second Amendment and how this law may or may not comply with Supreme Court precedent.
After Heller and McDonald, we had Bruen a couple years ago, and then last year we had Rahimi, kind of identifying with Bruen how legislatures, states, the federal government may be able to place restrictions on Second Amendment rights. In this context, we're dealing with potential emergency orders which are entered ex parte, meaning the respondent is not present, has no ability to object, provide evidence to negate the petition, at least initially within that first hearing. That, to me, expresses some due process concerns. And in fact, in Rahimi, even though the court upheld that restriction in federal law, there was discussion about due process measures that must be in place to ensure that constitutional rights are protected. How does this legislation address those constitutional concerns that were raised by Bruen and Rahimi?
It's always interesting to see when you're watching these floor debates in either the House or the Senate. If there's a really tough question that you have to get into the legal weeds on, this is all on the record. This is going into transcripts that could be used for court, that could be used for a whole host of things, including challenges of laws. And you had staff right there to help kind of facilitate some of those answers. So we see this type of thing quite a bit. Questions asked, long delay, confer with staff, and then they answer the question.
Thank you again for your patience. We're talking about emergency orders of protection. So built into this process are the findings of imminent danger, exigent circumstances, and the critical need to protect the petitioner and their families. This is a temporary separation of a person from their firearms, which will be revisited at the plenary where there is notice and the ability for the respondent to respond.
Thank you for that answer. I still believe there are constitutional concerns with Bruen and Rahimi, particularly in our state, where we have a FOID card, and when an individual has an order of protection entered against him or her, they lose their FOID card. And if that order of protection is ever vacated or removed, they don't receive their firearms back immediately, even if it was shown that the petition was fraudulently obtained, meaning it was obtained under false pretenses or through the use of inaccurate or incorrect information. Because an individual has to reapply for their FOID card and get the FOID card back, which is a process which takes more than 14 days, which we list 14 days and they can receive the firearms back, but they won't have their FOID back in 14 days. So I think you couple what we've developed in this framework with our FOID card problems in Illinois, and we're going to have serious constitutional issues when this goes to court.
State Representative Edgar Gonzalez, he also spoke about this. In particular, the person the bill is named after was one of his constituents.
Karina Gonzalez and Daniela Alvarez in the Little Village neighborhood of Chicago. Karina and Daniela, on the 4th of July weekend, just 5 minutes away from my house, were killed by their husband and father after Karina did what society judges other people for not doing, going to our courts and our systems for protection. This is a family who was deeply loved by the people who miss them every day. I want to acknowledge a few of those people here today. her cousin, Monica Alvarez, who's here in the gallery, and her surviving son, Manny Alvarez, who is sitting here right next to me as my page for the day. Karina's case was not an antidote. There are dozens of victims a year who are gunned down by their abusers across Illinois. The opposition would like to point out the importance of transfer and storage of firearms when discussing the bill. But as I mentioned earlier today in committee, when the opposition is making the case for protecting pieces of metal over survivors, regardless of the legal arguments, they have lost the moral argument.
I urge for an aye vote. Thank you.
State Representative Dan Calkins, he pointed out that Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul may say that this is constitutional, but he said the Attorney General also said that about PICA, which a district court said was unconstitutional. And it was also pointed out that the Attorney General was in the House chambers before this passed in the 103rd General Assembly. But Calkins went on further, and he had some pretty pointed questions.
What we're trying to do here is thread a needle to save lives. Not only the lives of the petitioners and their families, but the lives of the law enforcement who will put themselves on the line to go get those guns. So we listen to their concerns.
I get your point. It's an emotional appeal. Once you start to take someone's constitutional rights away, you have gone down a road that I don't think any of us should go down. I don't care if it's the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the First Amendment. When you take someone's constitutional rights away, we say, I would rather free one guilty person than convicted an innocent person. This is the tenet of the rights that we have that are protected under this Constitution, God-given rights, not man's rights.
And then you've got Representative Adam Niemerg also right to the bill, talking about the problems that he has with the measure.
We have a bill here, folks, that a petitioner can go to court, circumvent the state's attorney and law enforcement, file for that order of protection. The judge shall issue that order of protection. Law enforcement issues that order of protection, serves that order of protection with the search warrant, kicks in somebody's door, seizes their firearms, and they have no due process rights at all. And you say, well, they can petition the courts, get their FOID card back later. That typically takes about 18 months. The radical left in this state is not only out of touch with working people, they're out of touch with reality. Illinois has one of the most restrictive states. We're one of the most restrictive states in the country when it comes to gun laws. Every state around us, except Wisconsin and Michigan, have constitutional carry. Only Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, and New Jersey require additional identification to purchase firearms, with Illinois being the worst state in the union.
Again, as in the Senate and the House, there were several Republicans that joined Democrats in supporting this measure, but I imagine that you'll see a lot more about this as challenges to the law could come forward in the courts. Something we'll definitely be watching closely. It's Illinois in Focus Daily, longer segments, but I think an important issue that a lot of people are concerned about. So hopefully that's enlightening, and be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Get the headlines in your inbox each and every weekday morning. Go to thecentersquare.com and wake up with us here at America's Talking Network.
Leader Lightford moves that the Senate adjourn. Sine die. All those in favor will say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the Senate of the 103rd General Assembly stands adjourned. Sine die.
Imagine when you add in the cost of mileage, of staffing, of utilities, of security, of materials, etc. It's safe to say that the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for several $100,000 by the time we are done, with very little to show for it. This is irresponsible government at its finest.
All right, that was Senate President Don Harmon and Chris Miller from last week at the tail end of lame duck session for the 103rd General Assembly. But now we've got a new General Assembly in place and some big things to look forward to. We'll be tracking it all here with the Center Square and America's Talking Network with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Let's get into it. So last week was the wrap up of the 103rd General Assembly. Sine die. Not sure that's how you pronounce it, but either way, they wrap things up. The 103rd General Assembly, 10,000 plus bills that were filed. All those are trashed now. They're not going to be advancing anymore out of that body. Now we've got the 104th General Assembly. On Wednesday, they were seated, and this is kind of the same story as the past 2 years. Same leaders were selected. Senate President Don Harmon was selected as, again, Senate President.
So whether you've been here for 30 years or 30 minutes, you are an Illinois state senator. We're all in this together, and if you've read media clips or financial reports, it might be a tough year ahead. We will face stressful moments. So I am challenging myself and everyone here to be the better leaders of our state, to treat everyone with decency and respect, and to let that shine through our work.
In the Senate, Minority Leader John Curran was again elected Minority Leader.
I want to thank President Harmon for making that table more open to the minority party. And I look forward to that continued inclusion in the upcoming session. We represent the geographic majority of this state, and we have a lot to offer.
Now, by rule, minority leaders and Senate President and House Speaker, they can only serve now 10 consecutive year terms. So it's, 5 different 2-year terms? And Senate President Don Harmon, he's been Senate President since January of 2020. You've got House Speaker Chris Welch. He's been Speaker since 2021, and he was reelected on Wednesday to be the 104th General Assembly Speaker of the House.
Know this. We were sent here to foster compassion, not division. We're expected to make the path to a bright future wider, not narrower. And our mission is to build something better, not tear it down. So cruel and regressive policies that dehumanize our neighbors or strip away fundamental freedoms, I'm going to tell you right now, we will have no home in Illinois for those policies. Those whose goal is simply performative outrage and provocation will find that this House will not waste the people's times on those games. And those who wrongly believe their job here is simply to say no will find that decisions are made by those with the sincere desire and the moral clarity, Father Pfleger, to get to yes.
And again, not much surprise here. Not a lot of change up in leadership. You had House Minority Leader Tony McCombie reelected to that position as well.
As we approach the 104th General Assembly, our caucus is focused on 3 things. 1, fostering economic growth. 2, cutting unnecessary spending. 3, and opposing any tax increases. These priorities are not just goals. They are essential steps toward making Illinois a place of opportunity and prosperity. Illinois is a great place to live. And Illinois has always been a state of possibilities, but one-party control has stifled that success.
By the way, base pay for state legislators, $93,000. $93,000, tax dollars. And leadership roles, they get a stipend on top of that. So you've got the $93,000. House Speaker gets $50,000+ on top of that. Minority Leader gets $50,000 plus on top of that. Other leadership positions range from an additional $12,000 to $27,000 in committees, and if you had a committee position, you get more money. So a lot of tax dollars going just for salary. But State Representative Chris Miller, he pointed out that they also get per diem, $170 a day. So for like lame duck session, they got $170 a day each. Then you tack on all the other costs that there are, and taxpayers are paying a pretty penny for the General Assembly.
Imagine when you add in the cost of mileage, of staffing, of utilities, of security, of materials, etc. It's safe to say that the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for several $100,000 by the time we are done, with very little to show for it. This is irresponsible government at its finest.
So once the General Assembly was seated, they have the 104th in. Now it's time to get to the rules. In the Senate, these rules, they're really the backbone of how things operate. And it's procedure, like how bills are filed, what bills get out of committee, how people in the General Assembly are supposed to conduct themselves. The House and the Senate have separate rules. Senate's Majority Leader, Kimberly Lightfoot, laid out some of the updates that they're proposing and passed at the Illinois Senate.
Number one, we will remove references to special committees of the redistricting committee, since the redistricting committee is no longer a standing committee of the Senate. Two, we will remove the Early Childhood Education Committee and add the committees on child welfare, commerce, consumer protection, criminal law, and pensions. Three, we will specifically require senators to avoid threats, inciting violence, or other assaults in debate.
In the House, some history here. Remember, former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, he's on trial this week. Actually, today he's going to be expected to be grilled by prosecutors as he shocked everybody and took the witness stand last week. So cross-examination is going on today. But the former House Speaker, he was Speaker for all but 2 years, from 1983 to 2021, and he had his own rules. And a lot of people said those rules were pretty strict, very unfair to Republicans. And that was something that in the Illinois House for the 104th General Assembly, State Representative Ryan Spain was trying to get at when he was debating House Majority Leader Robin Gable about the House rules.
This week has been a momentous week, both here in Springfield, but also in the city of Chicago, as we have watched the testimony of Speaker Madigan in federal court. And the subject of the House Rules Committee, of which these rules, I must say, are essentially the same rules that Speaker Madigan had in place. And I'm sure you'll also say that Lee Daniels had rules in place in 1994 for a small period of time, and that's true as well. But these were Speaker Madigan's rules that had existed for decades.
These are not the same as Speaker Madigan's rules. And I didn't serve on Speaker Madigan's Rules Committee.
Did you have an understanding, as the Speaker testified in court this week, Speaker Madigan, that the general rule was that if a sponsor wanted to call a bill, we would call it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Did you have an understanding under Speaker Madigan, as he testified this week in federal court, that his general rule was if a bill sponsor wanted to call the bill, we would call it?
No, I did not hear Speaker Madigan's testimony. I was here.
Is that arrangement that the Speaker testified to under oath, Speaker Madigan, still the practice in place in this House of Representatives?
You know, I can only speak to the rules that we have now and the rules that are proposed.
Speaker Madigan further testified that if there were a majority of House Democrats against a bill, he would not call it. But if a substantial majority of his Democratic members wanted to call a bill, he would. Is that arrangement still in place today in our House of Representatives?
Yeah, I cannot say what Speaker Madigan did or didn't do. As I said, I was not on his Rules Committee, and I would really like to go back to, if you have questions about these 104th rules that are proposed.
Now, why are the rules so important? Again, a lot of it deals with how bills move. Do they go to the Rules Committee and get out with Democrat support only, or can Republicans actually move legislation? State Representative Dan Ugasti, he had serious concerns about the fairness of this and how he says his constituents aren't getting the proper representation that they deserve.
You believe that merely allowing a representative to come here and speak about bills everyone else is passing is actually allowing their constituents to be represented. I will tell you that a good number of the 108,000 people I represent feel like they weren't represented last time. Because in the 103rd General Assembly, despite the fact that I filed 40 or so bills, I was allowed to call absolutely zero.
Now, we'll have a ton to unpack in the weeks ahead because even though you had the old General Assembly close out, the new General Assembly come in, they've already filed more than 1,000 bills. And we'll be trying to do what we can to unpack those, to see how taxpayers are impacted, to see how firearms are impacted, to see how drivers are impacted, and a whole host more. So be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every weekday morning here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Get the headlines in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. Find me anywhere, just search Bishop on Air. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. We're going to try to do this again tomorrow because there's tons to unpack from lame duck session. But I want to remind you, follow me at Bishop on Air on X and get the newsletter with thecentersquare.com. While I wasn't able to do a lot of live shows last week, I was able to still keep an eye on what's going on in the legislature, and you can see those headlines at thecentersquare.com and on X with Bishop on Air. Have yourselves a great day, and we'll see you soon.